The girl who was forced to love a stranger ended up saving the man who secretly belonged to her all along. And when she almost died, he finally realized he'd been Hayes long before she ever knew his name. Late at night, the haunting quiet of the sprawling Danvers estate settled over the polished marble floors like a thick fog. Chandeliers shimmered overhead, their golden glow casting perfect shadows across ornate walls. But for Ayla, it all felt hollow. This was not a home. It was a prison made of glass and gold. Ayla Danvers, the only daughter of a powerful political dynasty, stood by her window overlooking the meticulously manicured gardens. Her reflection flickered in the glass, eyes that held storms, lips pressed into a line that knew the taste of rebellion. She had always been the wild card in a family obsessed with appearances. Emotional, unruly, misunderstood, and despite everything she did to be seen, she always felt invisible. Her father, Senator Gerald Danvers, was a man of icy precision, a strict disciplinarian whose love was conditional on obedience. Her stepmother, Camille, with her serpent smile and velvet voice, hid cruelty behind pearls and perfume. They never missed a chance to remind Ayla that she was a disappointment, an inconvenience. But once, there had been warmth. Once, there had been a woman with kind eyes and a soft touch, Ayla's mother, Helena. Her laugh had filled these cold corridors like sunshine breaking through rain. But that light had been extinguished too soon, leaving behind only silence and shadows. No one talked about Helena anymore. Camille made sure of that. Yet Ayla remembered. In secret moments, she would retreat to the attic, dusting off a small, leather-bound diary hidden beneath floorboards. It was her mother's. The fading ink told stories of love, of dreams, of fears. "You are fire, my Ayla," one entry read. "Never let them dim your light." It was the only thing that kept her grounded in a world where her choices were stolen, her voice silenced, and her spirit confined. The estate may have sparkled on the outside, but to Ayla, it was nothing more than a gilded cage. And she was the bird trapped within it, wings bruised, but not broken. Not yet. The scent of white lilies lingered in the air like a sweet lie. Every corner of the Danvers estate was drenched in grandeur. Crystal chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 silent witnesses, velvet drapes fell in perfect symmetry, and an ocean of guests poured in, cloaked in couture and curiosity. The media stood like vultures outside the grand cathedral doors, flashbulbs popping like thunder before the storm. And at the center of it all stood Ayla, drowning in silk and satin. Her wedding dress, a custom creation by the most sought-after designer in Europe, hugged her frame like a cage disguised as couture. The intricate lace sleeves brushed against her trembling skin, and the cathedral-length veil threatened to suffocate her every time she breathed in. To the world, she looked like the perfect bride, elegant, composed, radiant. But inside, her soul was screaming. The man waiting for her at the altar was Senator Adrian Vance, a man twice her age, powerful, poised, and every bit her father's political pawn. Their engagement had been announced with pride, blasted across headlines as a strategic alliance between two of the country's most influential families. A union built on legacy, the press had praised. But Ayla knew the truth. This wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction. Adrian didn't love her. He barely knew her. And yet, here she was, walking toward him down a flower-laden aisle while violins sang a haunting melody that didn't belong to her love story, but to her funeral. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her every step, some admiring, some envious, most clueless. The whispers buzzed like flies around her. "She looks divine. Such a lucky girl, marrying into real power." She finally settled down, about time. But they didn't know. They didn't know how just 3 nights ago, she had cried silently into her pillow, the same one that still carried the faint scent of a mother's perfume. They didn't know that she had once dreamt of love that felt like poetry, not contracts and campaign speeches. And they didn't know that beneath the flawless makeup and fake smile was a girl who had never been more afraid in her life. As her heels clicked against the marble floor, her thoughts raced louder than the music. "This isn't real. This isn't right. You're not supposed to feel like this." Cold, hollow, terrified. She dared a glance at her father sitting in the front pew. His face was as unreadable as ever, his expression a portrait of political pride. Beside him, Camille dabbed at imaginary tears, her performance as flawless as her diamond-studded choker. Not once did either of them meet Ayla's eyes. Because they knew she didn't want this. But that had never mattered. Not when the stakes were so high. Not when marrying her off could secure another term, another alliance, another donation. Ayla was not a daughter. She was a lever, a pawn moved precisely when and where they needed. When she reached the altar, Adrian took her hand, firm, possessive, cold. His smile was for the cameras, not for her. And as the officiant began the ceremonial speech, Ayla stared ahead, her vision blurring, her ears ringing. The words felt distant. "Do you, Ayla Danvers, take this man?" Her lips parted, but her mind rebelled. Do I? Do I take a stranger to bed, a lie to heart, a chain to soul? Is this who I am now? A doll in a wedding dress, knotted into submission? Her voice came out like frost. I do. The crowd erupted in polite applause. Somewhere, a flashbulb went off. Somewhere, her father nodded in satisfaction. And somewhere deep within her, something cracked. As the ceremony ended and the reception began in a sea of chandeliers and champagne, Ayla stood in the eye of a storm, smiling, greeting, posing. But inside, she was unraveling. Her laughter was hollow, her hands were cold, and her heart whispered a quiet, desperate prayer. If anyone's listening, please, get me out of here. In the darkest corner of the ballroom, she caught her reflection in a gilded mirror, beautiful, broken, and barely breathing beneath the weight of duty. This wasn't love. This wasn't happiness. This was sacrifice, signed and sealed in silk and stone. The silence of the grand manor was deceiving. Cold, still, it cloaked the chaos that brewed in Ayla's chest like a velvet shroud. The soft click of her heels was muffled against the marbled floor as she navigated the dimly lit corridor, the hem of her simple, cream-colored dress brushing the edges of the ornate rug. Her breath came in shallow bursts, fast, controlled, as if her lungs were trying to keep pace with her racing heart. She clutched the folded parchment tighter in her hand. It wasn't just paper, it was salvation. Proof. The kind that could dismantle the empire built on lies. The kind that could free her from the gilded prison she'd been trapped in for far too long. But she needed to get out. Now, a creaking door to the left startled her. A servant perhaps, or Weiss. She pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide, her pulse deafening in her ears. No movement, no voices, just the soft hum of the overhead chandelier swaying slightly in the draft. She slipped silently past, her steps now even lighter, quieter, trained like someone who had spent years perfecting the art of not being seen. She reached the narrow back hall, the servants' wing, rarely patrolled, almost forgotten, and allowed herself a brief, shaky breath. Just a few more turns, and she'd reach the gate. The car was parked just beyond, its engine idling under the moonlight, waiting. But as she turned the final corner, the hallway, her last hope, was no longer empty. They were already there. 2 guards, both dressed in the estate's signature gray, eyes cold, hands resting ominously near their weapons. Ayla Whitmore, one said, voice deep and unyielding. You need to come with us. She froze, the blood draining from her face. No, 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 no. Not now. Not when she was so close. Her mind screamed, but her body refused to move. The parchment trembled in her fist, crinkling as her knuckles turned white from the force of her grip. She looked left, a closed door. Right, a staircase, but it led upward, back into the lion's den. Behind her, no time. Her only option was forward. Panic rose like a tide inside her chest, threatening to consume her. The air felt thinner. Her vision narrowed. Don't make this harder than it has to be, the other guard said, stepping forward. You know the master doesn't like to be disobeyed. That word, master, turned her panic into something else. Fire. Defiance. She had obeyed for too long. Her eyes darted toward the chandelier chain above them, then back to the polished vase on the side table. She made a decision. "I'm not going back," she whispered, more to herself than to them. And then she ran. The corridor trembled with tension, the atmosphere thick with an unspoken dread as Ayla stood frozen, staring at the two guards who blocked her escape. Her pulse was a furious drumbeat, echoing inside her skull. Time seemed to slow, stretch, her options collapsing in on her like a closing cage. But then, her eyes landed on one of the guards. The younger one. He was tall, lean, almost out of place in that gray uniform. His jaw was tight, his grip firm on the baton at his side. But his eyes. God, those eyes. Hazel. Warm. Haunted. Familiar. Her breath caught. Just for a second, the whole world tilted. It was him. Zane. The name echoed in her soul like a prayer she thought she'd forgotten how to say. Memories surged forward, hidden glances across rose gardens, whispered promises beneath candlelit balconies, the feel of his hand finding hers in the dark when no one was watching. The boy with dust on his boots and dreams in his voice. The man who had once asked her to run away with him, and she hadn't dared. Until now, their eyes locked, and in that split second, something unspoken passed between them. Raw, desperate, electric. He recognized her. No helmet, no orders, no uniform could erase what they had once been. And yet, his expression was unreadable, torn between duty and the ache he'd buried for too long. The older guard stepped forward. "Enough of this," he growled, reaching for her arm. But Ayla acted before he could blink. She spun around, quick as fire, and grabbed Zane by the collar of his uniform. His breath hitched in surprise, his body frozen. And then, without a second's hesitation, she pulled him in and kissed him. Hard. It wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was war. A kiss that screamed of longing and fury and regret all rolled into one devastating moment. Her fingers tangled in his collar, her body pressed against his as though she could pour every unsaid word into that one act. "I'm sorry. I loved you. I still do. And I need you to let me go." Zane didn't move. For a heartbeat, he didn't even breathe. His eyes fluttered shut. The hallway around them vanished. No guards, no escape plans, no threats. Just the taste of a girl he had once planned a future with, and lost. When Ayla pulled away, her eyes were glassy, but fierce. "Don't stop me," she whispered, barely audible. "Please." And then she turned. Zane didn't chase her. He didn't call for backup. He just stood there, dazed, breathless, shattered. The other guard shouted behind him, "Zane, what the hell are you doing?" But he couldn't respond. The camera lingered on his face, a storm of emotion flickering across it. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. His hands hung limp at his sides, heart hammering, eyes still fixed on the space where she had stood just seconds ago. Because Ayla wasn't just another fugitive. She was the girl he had once promised forever to. She was his secret bride, bound not by law but by vows made in moonlight and silence. And now, she was running, not just from danger, but toward destiny. And he had just let her go. The world knew him as Zane Malik, the quiet, obedient junior guard stationed at the southern wing of the Whitmore estate. Just another nameless face in gray. Dutiful, forgettable. But behind the forged ID, behind the worn leather boots and pressed uniform, was a truth cloaked in shadows and secrets. Because Zane was no ordinary guard. He was the heir to an empire. Zane Ulrafe, firstborn son to one of the wealthiest royal dynasties in the Middle East. A name that echoed through corridors of old power and whispered in the halls of billion-dollar boardrooms. With land stretching beyond the horizon, a lineage steeped in blood, history, and gold, his future had always been sealed in stone. Inherit the crown, manage the legacy, marry well. But with power came paranoia. His mother, Queen Layla, had lived through betrayal masked as love. A woman once enchanted by sweet nothings and expensive roses, only to discover years later that her own husband had been nothing more than a polished opportunist. That bitter lesson had shaped her into a fortress, protective, calculated, and merciless when it came to her son's future. "We will not allow another outsider to enter this family for her own gain," she had told Zane, her voice sharp as crystal. "I need to know that any woman who claims to love you, loves you, not your crown." And so, the plan was born. A test. A masquerade. Zayn would disappear from the headlines. No bodyguards. No luxury cars. No royal seal. He would step into the world, stripped of every privilege, and live among the people. Not as a prince, but as a man. He volunteered willingly, almost eagerly. After all, how hard could it be? He'd always found the world of suits and handshakes suffocating. Maybe, for once, he could taste something real. And if they happened to find someone worth trusting in the process, so be it. He never expected her. Ayla, the name now haunted him. From the very first time she had looked at him, not through him, he knew she was different. He remembered that moment with searing clarity, the way she had smirked at him during a security briefing, unimpressed, unreadable. Where most people bowed their heads or stiffened at his presence, Ayla had met his eyes and held them, like she had nothing to lose. She had worn pain like perfume, pride like armor, and still, beneath it all, he had seen her softness. The way she offered her umbrella to an old woman in the rain. How she spent hours with the estate gardener, asking about wildflowers and refusing to let the staff call home. The contradictions made her impossible to forget. She was fire and glass, sharp, dangerous, and breakable, all at once. Zayn was supposed to observe, not feel. But feelings, as he learned, didn't follow protocol. At first, he kept his distance. He reminded himself of the purpose, a 3-month assignment, a character study. But then came the late-night walks where she hummed to herself, unaware he was watching. The accidental moments where their hands brushed. Her voice, quiet yet defiant, echoing in his head long after their conversations ended. He began waiting for glimpses of her, craving them. And when he learned of her engagement, arranged, cold, and cruel, something inside him shattered. He wasn't supposed to intervene, but he did, subtly at first, changing her security rotations so she'd have moments of freedom, slipping her information about secret exits, shielding her, quietly, from within the walls that sought to own her. And then today happened. She kissed him, not knowing the truth, not knowing that he was already hers, had always been. That kiss, it had undone him. She thought he was just a guard, someone she could distract, use as a decoy. But what she didn't know was that he would have burned the entire estate down to help her escape. As she vanished down the corridor, disappearing into the shadows, Zayn stood still, breathless, devastated. Not because she had left, but because she had left without knowing who he truly was. She didn't know she had kissed her secret groom. Their union had already been decided, months ago, in secret, at a private royal ceremony known only to a handful of elders. It had been political at first, arranged, inevitable, a way to unite two families with legacy and power. Ayla had no idea the marriage contract existed. She had never even been told. But he knew, and he had accepted. But now, it was no longer about alliances. Now, it was about her. He was in love, helplessly, dangerously, irrevocably, with a woman the world called a rebel. The same woman his mother would never approve of. The same woman who just kissed him like he was a final breath. Zayn exhaled slowly, his chest heavy with conflict. He could chase her, or he could protect her from the shadows, until the moment she was ready to know everything. For now, he had to stay hidden. But one thing was certain, a storm was coming. And when it broke, the world would know exactly who Ayla had kissed in that corridor, not a god, not a servant, but the man destined to become her king. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, painting London in tones of silver and shadow. Neon signs flickered through the mist, and the city's heartbeat slowed beneath the weight of twilight. Near South Bank, tucked between an aging bakery and a shuttered antique store, stood a modest building with a rusted blue sign that read, Willow House, Women's Support Shelter and Community Library. Inside, the scent of old pages and black tea lingered in the air. The space was small, peeling wallpaper, mismatched chairs, but it felt warm. Safe. Here, no one asked questions. No one judged where you came from or what you were running from. Ayla sat near the corner window, legs curled under her, flipping through a worn-out copy of Jane Eyre. Her hair was still damp from the rain, clinging to her cheeks. She looked nothing like the woman who once lit up ballrooms in diamonds and silk. Here, she was softer, still bruised, still haunted, but free. At least, for now. She believed she was invisible, unnoticed, but someone had been watching her, quietly, from the doorway. Zane stood at the threshold of the reading lounge, his heart pounding like a storm trapped in his chest. He hadn't meant to find her. He'd only been following whispers, traces from old contacts, a favor owed at the embassy. But the moment he saw her through the cracked window, curled up like a ghost in borrowed clothing, something inside him shattered. She looked lost, beautifully, achingly lost. He couldn't approach her as Zane. Not yet. So, he stepped inside, carefully, using a name from his past. A childhood friend, a borrowed identity, a new beginning. "Hi," he said gently. His voice was warm, cautious, curious. Ella looked up, startled. Her fingers paused on the edge of the page. Her eyes, wide, ocean-deep, unreadable, narrowed. Not afraid, just careful. He extended a hand. "I'm Ryan. I help out here sometimes. I saw you reading. It's one of my favorites." She blinked slowly, then tilted her head. "You like Gothic literature?" A small smile touched his lips. "I like stories where people survive what was meant to break them." Something flickered in her eyes. Pain? Recognition? She looked away, shutting the book as if afraid it might reveal too much. "I'm Ayla," she said softly. "I don't usually talk to strangers." "Then let me own the privilege," he replied, easing into the chair across from her. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, delicate, fragile, like two threads being pulled gently toward each other. They talked. Books, the shelter, the weather, safe things, spoken in careful tones. But with every passing moment, their walls began to crack. Ayla found herself surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. This Ryan with kind eyes and quiet patience. Zane watched her in stillness. Every movement, every breath. The way she traced the rim of her paper cup when she was nervous. The tiny tremble in her voice when she said she was between places. The fire in her, dimmed, but not gone. He didn't push. He didn't ask. He simply stayed. But every second, his chest ached with the weight of everything he couldn't say. "She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know I'm the one she kissed. She doesn't know. We're already bound." And yet, she was opening up to him, unknowingly, vulnerably, and that terrified him more than anything. Because this time, there was no bet, no agenda, just a man in love with a girl who had turned his entire world upside down. When she laughed, just once, soft and fleeting, it cut him deeper than any battlefield ever had. He wanted to reach across the table, tuck the damp strands behind her ear, and tell her the truth. Tell her everything. But not yet. She wasn't ready, and neither was he. As she stood to leave, gathering her coat and book, she hesitated, looked at him. "You said your name is Ryan?" she asked, her tone inquisitive. He nodded, his heart thundering. "Yeah." She stared at him for a second longer than necessary, her brows ever so slightly furrowed. Something about him tugged at her memory, like a melody half-remembered, a scent on the wind. "You seem familiar," she said slowly. "Have we met before?" He smiled, one part heartbreak, one part hope. Maybe in another life. Time, in its quiet, unbothered way, began to stretch in soft golden hours. Days bled into one another like brushstrokes on canvas. None rushed, all gently painted with fleeting glances, whispered laughter, and secrets shared between two people who had long forgotten how to let anyone in. Ayla and Ryan. That's how the world saw them now. Two strangers who happened to find each other in the echo of heartache. He would find her at the community library some mornings, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, a dog-eared novel tucked beneath his arm. She always pretended to be annoyed when he interrupted her reading, but the way her lips curled, that soft smirk she tried to hide, betrayed the truth. Their dates were never grand. There were no chandeliers or violins or paparazzi-lined red carpets. Just long walks through rain-slicked alleys, the occasional shared pastry on a park bench, or evenings sitting beneath fairy lights at the corner cafe, talking until the candles burned out. But oh, the conversations. He never rushed her, never pressed for her past, though he ached to hold the weight of it. Instead, they talked about everything else. Philosophy, broken dreams, the stars. She once told him her favorite sound in the world was the pages of a book flipping beside an open window. He told her he liked the smell of jasmine in thunderstorms. And in those moments, simple, tender, Ayla forgot to be afraid. It wasn't one grand gesture. It wasn't fireworks or declarations. It was him remembering how she took her tea, him standing between her and a speeding bicycle on the sidewalk, him listening, really listening, like her words weren't burdens but blessings. And slowly, piece by fragile piece, Ayla let herself fall, not all at once, not the reckless kind of falling she had once known. This time, it was cautious, guarded, like a wild animal learning to trust the hand that fed it. But still, she fell. One night, as they sat on the rooftop of the shelter, staring at a fractured moon behind wispy clouds, Ayla turned to him, voice quiet but firm. "I don't know who you were before this, Ryan, but you've made me feel human again." Those words, innocent, sincere, shattered something inside Zane, because he knew the truth. He wasn't Ryan. He wasn't the man she believed in. He was the one who had lied, deceived. He was the guard she had kissed in desperation. He was the groom she never knew she had. And now, she trusted him. Zane smiled gently at her, but when he looked away, pain carved itself deep into his features. Every touch, every word, every second she gave him was another dagger of guilt pressed to his chest. He didn't deserve her forgiveness. Not yet. And the thought haunted him endlessly. What if she never did? Late at night, alone in the shadows of his rented flat, he'd stare at his reflection in the mirror and whisper to the silence. What if she hates me the moment she finds out? He had meant to protect her, meant to guard her heart from the cruel world. But in doing so, he had built a world of lies around them both. A castle of cards ready to collapse with one confession. She was opening her soul to him, and he was hiding the truth of theirs. Each morning, he told himself, "Today, I'll tell her." But each time he looked into her eyes, so full of cautious hope, his resolve crumbled. He couldn't bear to be the reason those eyes dulled again. So instead, he loved her in silence, in gestures, in the space between truth and lie. Every stolen glance was a prayer. Every brush of her fingers was a punishment. But fate does not wait forever. And Zane knew the day was coming when the truth would no longer ask for permission. It would arrive like a storm. And when it did, she would see the man behind the mask. And he feared more than anything that the only thing she'd see was betrayal. The clouds over London hung low that morning, heavy and brooding, as though the sky itself sensed that something was about to unravel. Inside the humble shelter, Ayla moved with quiet purpose. She was helping sort donated clothes, her fingers brushing over fraying fabric and forgotten threads. She looked peaceful, grounded, unaware that just outside those worn-down walls, her carefully rebuilt world stood at the edge of collapse. Outside, a Blacktown car pulled up, sleek and silent like a predator. From it stepped Frederick Carter, Ayla's father, a man whose power clung to him like a tailored suit. His gaze was sharp, arrogant, cruel in its calculation. The press followed like vultures behind him, cameras flashing, microphones raised. It had taken him weeks to locate her, weeks of tapping old friends, bribing aides, manipulating the media with sub-stories of a wayward daughter lost to scandal. But today, he had found her, and he wasn't just here to retrieve her. He was here to destroy the illusion she'd wrapped herself in. As Ayla stepped out into the courtyard, surprised by the sudden noise, blinded by the flashes, she froze. Her eyes scanned the crowd, confusion blooming. And then she saw him, her father, standing with a triumphant smile, flanked by reporters. "Ayla," he called, arms spread wide in mock concern. "There you are. We've been so worried." But she didn't move. Her spine stiffened. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer her. He turned to the cameras instead, voice loud, calculated, meant for headlines. "My daughter," he declared, "has been under the influence of a man in disguise, a man pretending to be a god, a volunteer." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Ayla blinked. Slowly, the words made no sense. Her father's voice sharpened. "The man calling himself Ryan is in fact Zayn al-Raif, heir to the al-Raif fortune. Her secret fiancé. A deal was signed between our families long ago." The world tilted. The breath left her lungs in a single, silent gasp. No, no, that wasn't possible. Behind the crowd, Zayn emerged, drawn by the noise, unaware of the bomb that had just dropped. But the moment he saw her face, her wide, broken eyes, he knew. He was too late. Ayla took a shaky step backward, her body trembling. She looked at him, really looked, and in that instant, everything she'd trusted shattered like glass beneath a boot. Ryan wasn't real. He never had been. He wasn't the kind stranger with warm eyes and quiet words. He was the guard from the estate, the groom she never knew about, the lie she had let into her soul. "How long?" she asked, her voice flat, barely audible above the rising media frenzy. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" Zayn stepped forward, his own face hollowed with guilt. "Ayla, please. I wanted to tell you. Every day, I tried." "But you didn't," she snapped. Her voice cracked like thunder. "You let me fall for someone who didn't even exist." The cameras kept flashing, but the world around them had gone silent. Just two people standing in the wreckage of a story they'd written in lies. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not in front of the press. Not in front of him. "You were supposed to be different," she whispered, each word dripping in betrayal. "And you were worse." Zayn tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. "No," she said firmly. Her gaze was cold now, guarded. "You don't get to touch me. You don't get to explain this away with good intentions. You chose to lie, and I chose to believe in something real for once." She turned, her footsteps sharp, swift, walking through the sea of reporters, through the storm of flashing lights and gasps. Her back was straight, her head high, but inside, she was breaking. Zayn didn't chase her. He stood still in the middle of the courtyard, surrounded by chaos, cameras, and the weight of his own decisions. As she disappeared down the street, swallowed by the gray mist of the city, one thought repeated over and over in his mind. "I've lost her, and this time, it might be forever." The city forgot her. Or maybe Ayla forgot the city. Either way, by the time the media frenzy died down and the headlines grew bored of her name, she was already gone. No one saw her slip into the crowded train station at dawn, dressed in faded jeans and an oversized sweater. No one noticed the suitcase that bumped along the tiles behind her, its wheels worn and uneven. She didn't leave a note. She didn't answer the calls. Not even the shelter staff knew where she went. She disappeared the way grief does, slowly, then all at once. Whitmore Bay, a small coastal town tucked along the edge of the country, forgotten by time. The sea was wild here, unforgiving, and the air always smelled like salt and endings. Ayla found a cottage for rent at the edge of the cliffside, modest, with peeling white paint and ivy growing around the windows. It was perfect, because no one knew her here. Not the girl from the tabloids. Not the runaway bride. Not the betrayed woman with shattered eyes. Hey, she was no one. And for the first time in her life, that felt like peace. The days blurred into one another. She walked along the shore barefoot, letting the icy waves bite at her ankles. She scribbled in a worn journal. She drank tea without sugar and left the windows open, even when it rained. Silence became her companion. Not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that lets you breathe without explanation. But every now and then, at night, mostly, it would hit her. The betrayal. Not from the world, not from the press, but from him. Zayn. Ryan. Whoever the hell he was. She had opened her soul to a man with two faces and no warning. She had told him things she'd never said out loud. She had smiled, genuinely smiled, in his presence. And he had known all along. That burned more than anything else. She never cried in front of anyone. But sometimes, in the dead of night, curled up against the sound of crashing waves. She'd press her face into a pillow and let the sobs come, quiet, raw, and unending. Meanwhile, miles away in the city's golden silence, Zane was unraveling. He hadn't eaten properly in days. Sleep came in fragments. The estate felt colder without her, like every hallway echoed her absence. He walked through his world like a ghost in his own kingdom. His mother begged him to move on. His advisors insisted it was for the best. But none of them had seen the way she looked at him when she believed in him. None of them had felt her slip through their fingers like rain. None of them had lost her. He wrote to her, every word inked with trembling hands and guilt-ridden truth. Ayla, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. But I owe you the truth anyway. I never meant to deceive you. Not like that. I didn't know I'd fall in love with you. But I did. God, I did. I still do. Every single day. He sealed the envelope himself. No royal seal. No fancy stationery. Just his handwriting on the front. Miss Ayla Carter. No return address. The letter made its way to the cottage in Whitmore Bay. The postman left it tucked beneath the door one stormy afternoon. Ayla saw it. She picked it up, recognized the familiar scrawl, paused, then placed it on the windowsill, unopened. It remained there for days. A silent wait. A war waiting to be read. But she didn't have the strength. Not yet. Instead, she stared at the waves, waiting for the ache in her chest to dull, wondering how something that felt so real could have been built on everything false. Zane waited. She never wrote back. And in the distance, separated by miles and heartbreak, they both sat in silence, oceans apart, carrying the ghost of a love that had fallen too fast, too deep, and maybe too late. The wind whispered through the tall grass that bordered the edge of the cliffs in Whitmore Bay. The waves below crashed with a restless rhythm, echoing the storm inside Ayla's chest. She sat curled on a wooden bench outside the seaside cafe, a knit shawl wrapped around her shoulders and a cup of untouched chamomile tea growing cold in her hands. Across from her, her childhood best friend, Myra, sat with a concerned gaze, elbows on the table, fingers curled around her own mug. Myra had come without judgment, just like she always did. The kind of friend who showed up when the world walked out. Ayla hadn't said much at first, just asked her to come. And Myra had come. Now, after moments of silence and distant seagull cries, Ayla finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. Was it all a lie? Myra looked up. You mean Zane? Ayla winced slightly at the name. It still hurt to say, to think, to feel. I mean, Ryan, she said, with a bitter half-laugh. Or Zane, or whatever his name is today. She shook her head, fingers tightening around her cup. He looked at me like I was the only person in the world. He listened like my words mattered. But all that time, he already knew. He knew who I was. He knew we were, her voice caught, bound. Myra reached across the table and took her hand gently. Do you really believe that kind of tenderness can be faked? Ayla didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted toward the ocean. I don't know what's wise, she whispered. That he lied, or that it still felt real. Back in the old Rafe estate, the golden halls that once gleamed with regality now felt like cages to Zane. He stood in the sprawling family conservatory, sunlight pouring in through the stained glass as his mother, Queen Layla, paced slowly in front of him. I've arranged for a private dinner, she said crisply. Princess Lena of Aravat. Her family has been waiting for a response. I'm not marrying anyone else, Zane said calmly, but firmly. Layla stopped. Her expression didn't change, but her voice dropped into a sharper octave. This girl, Ayla, she walked away. In public. Shamed you in front of the press. She is unstable, impulsive. She's human, he cut in. And she's the only one I've ever been myself with. His father, who had remained silent at the far end of the room, finally spoke. What if she never forgives you? Zane didn't blink. Then I'll wait anyway. In Ayla's mind, everything spun in circles. He should have told me. He looked so broken. But I gave him all of me. Was he falling, too? Or just pretending? I hate him, she said out loud. Myra raised a brow. You don't. I want to, Ayla corrected, her voice cracking. I want to hate him for lying, for sneaking into my life like a thief. But the worst part is, I still feel him. Her hand hovered over her chest. Hey, like something left behind that I can't remove. Like I'm haunted. Myra's eyes softened. Maybe it's not haunting, Ayla. Maybe it's unfinished. In Zane's mind, her voice was a ghost in every corridor. She said I was worse. I thought the truth would ruin her, not us. What if I was her only place to feel safe, and I turned it into a betrayal? He paced his room that night, the letter still sitting on his desk, the second one. The one he hadn't sent. This time, no explanations. No excuses. Just everything he never had the courage to say aloud. You made me want to be honest. You made me want to stay, when all I'd ever known was leaving. You were the only part of this entire story that felt like mine. He gripped the edge of the desk, knuckles white. What if she never opens the letter? He whispered into the empty room. What if she never lets me try again? The ocean roared outside Ayla's cottage as she stood by the windowsill. The letter still sat there, unopened, unmoved, untouched, but something inside her had shifted. And in a world full of lies, she couldn't stop wondering if maybe, just maybe, one part of it had been real. The world had moved on, but enemies never forget. While Ayla healed in silence and Zane battled shadows of guilt, old powers stirred in darker corners. Men who once feared the old Rafe name, now emboldened by the cracks in its legacy. To them, Ayla was not just the runaway fiancé or the socialite-turned-refugee. She was leverage, a weakness, the perfect target to shatter Zane's composure and drag his name, an empire, through the filth. And so they began to whisper. Articles, leaks, fabricated tapes, online forums flooded with twisted tales of Ayla's past, of a phase that never happened, theft she never committed, and betrayal she never imagined. Her name was etched in headlines again, this time not as the girl who disappeared, but the one who deserved to be forgotten. Her charity work, her quiet life in Whitmore Bay, erased by the weight of manufactured scandal. And Ayla, once again, found herself standing on fragile ground. It was a warm afternoon in the heart of London. The annual Artists for Healing Gala, a public fundraiser where Ayla had been asked to speak, unknowingly setting herself back in the spotlight. Dressed in a simple navy gown, her hair tucked behind her ears, she looked regal in her restraint. She stood at the podium, nervous but composed. The crowd was filled with unfamiliar faces. Investors, artists, press, all gathered under the golden chandeliers of the Eden Hall Pavilion. But not everyone was here for the art. In the crowd, a man in a tan blazer adjusted his cuff, not for elegance, but to reveal the ring on his hand. A sign, subtle, but unmistakable. The mark of an exiled faction who once swore to bring down the Ulray family and everything tied to them. Ayla was no longer just a woman. She was a symbol, a scar, and someone had decided to cut deeper. It started with murmurs. A voice from the back shouted, "How much were you paid to play the victim this time?" Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras turned. Ayla froze mid-sentence, her fingers gripping the edge of the podium. Then came another. Was Zane just your next billionaire conquest? And another. How many men did he use to climb this stage tonight? The room turned into a hostile arena. Flashes exploded. Questions jabbed like knives. Security looked around, overwhelmed. Ayla stood still, eyes wide, mouth parted, like a deer suddenly caught in a firestorm. Her voice left her. Her throat closed. A glass shattered near the stage. Someone surged forward. And then, a flash of movement. Zane. He appeared like a storm wrapped in black. A tailored suit, sharp jaw, fire in his eyes. The crowd parted on instinct. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked, with calm fury, a force of nature. Before anyone could reach her, he was already there, stepping between her and the crowd, shielding her body with his own. One hand protectively across her waist, the other raised at his side to stop the security from touching her. "Enough," he said, and the word cracked like thunder. Silence fell. Gasps turned to whispers. Reporters lowered their cameras. Even the accusers stilled. He turned to face the audience. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. If anyone here believes that slandering a woman who has endured more than any of you can imagine makes you powerful, I suggest you look in the mirror and ask yourself what you've done for the world lately. The room trembled with shame. He turned to Ayla, slowly, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, their eyes met again. Her breath hitched. He looked older, paler, sharper. The lines beneath his eyes told her he hadn't slept in weeks. But his gaze, that unwavering, storm-filled gaze, was still his. Ayla, he breathed, her name slipping from his lips like a vowel. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the war inside her heart. Zane stepped closer, careful not to touch her again. "I'm sorry," he whispered, low enough for only her to hear. "Not for being here, but for not being here sooner." Ayla's eyes shimmered with everything she couldn't say: rage, sorrow, longing, confusion. But she didn't turn away, and she didn't walk away either. Not this time. Zane stood before the towering windows of his private boardroom. The city's skyline sprawled like a battlefield of broken promises. Rain drizzled against the glass, blurring the lights beyond into vague, unrecognizable smudges. Fitting, he thought. Nothing looked clear anymore. His company, once a fortress of quiet power, stability, and respect, was crumbling from the inside out. Rumors, attacks, leaked documents. Old enemies now found new opportunities in his distraction. In the weeks since Ayla's disappearance, his mind had been fractured, his resolve thinned. Every decision he made felt like walking a tightrope through fog. And now, the financial reports glared at him from the table. Red. Everywhere. His campaign to fund sustainable housing initiatives across border towns, a project born from his own ideals, not politics, was being bled dry. Investors were pulling out. International donors were hesitant. The whispers about Ayla hadn't just tainted her. They had made him vulnerable, fallible, human. The board members were circling like vultures. The media was already hinting at incompetence. And for the first time in a long time, Zane felt cornered. His assistant, George, knocked softly, entering with a thick folder. "There's been a transaction," he said quietly. "An anonymous donor. This morning." Zane barely turned. "Another offer to buy us out." George shook his head and handed over the papers. "No, sir. It's different." Zane opened the folder. His eyes paused at the amount. It wasn't a donation. It was a lifeline. A single transfer, enough to not only stabilize his company's bleeding projects, but to breathe life back into his vision. No strings attached. No requests for bought seats. No demands. Just support. And at the bottom of the transaction, in place of a name, was a single line. A. Carter. That was all. He stared at the signature as if it might rise off the paper and whisper to him. Could it be her? No. It had to be a coincidence. But the ache in his chest knew better. The storm that calmed for just a second told him the truth before his mind could accept it. She had helped him. Again. Silently. She hadn't called. Hadn't written. Hadn't stood in front of him and declared forgiveness or affection. She had simply seen the storm from a distance. And built him a lighthouse. Zane lowered the papers slowly, his fingers trembling with an emotion he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. "She doesn't want me to know," he said aloud, more to himself than George. "But she still believes in me." George cleared his throat gently. "Should I trace the source, sir?" Zane shook his head. "No," he whispered. "Let her be silent, if that's what she needs. But I'll never mistake the sound of her heart again." He turned toward the rain-soaked city once more, that single signature echoing louder in his soul than any apology ever could. A. Carter, still watching, still protecting, even from afar. And this time, he wouldn't let the distance last forever. The rain had just begun, soft droplets kissing the windshield as Ayla drove alone through the winding roads that bordered the city. The world outside blurred, cold, gray, indifferent. Her fingers gripped the wheel tightly, thoughts spiraling like the storm brewing in the sky. She hadn't slept. She hadn't smiled. And she hadn't spoken to Zane since everything fell apart. She didn't see the car coming. It struck from the side, Fast, brutal, calculated. Her vehicle spun violently, metal shrieking against pavement, until it crashed into a concrete barrier. Time seemed to slow. Glass shattered like ice. Her head hit the steering wheel, and then nothing but darkness. Far away, Zane's phone rang. Unknown number. But when he picked up, all he heard was chaos. Ayla Danvers. Accident. Critical condition. St. Jude's Hospital. He didn't wait to breathe. He didn't wait to think. He just ran. Ran through red lights and memories, through the night air that suddenly felt suffocating. By the time he reached the hospital, his hands were shaking, his voice hoarse from shouting her name to silent corridors. Doctors swarmed. Machines beeped. Time blurred. While waiting, he paced through the sterile hallway like a man possessed. That's when George, his legal advisor, appeared, holding a folder with trembling hands. "You should see this," he whispered. Zane took the file without a word and opened it, his eyes scanning the pages, his heart stopping at the signature. Ayla Danvers. The financial records, hidden trusts, silent donations. It was all her. Months ago, when his company had been on the verge of collapse, it wasn't the board. It wasn't a bailout. It was Ayla. She had used her inheritance, every last untouched penny of a mother's legacy, to save him. Quietly, unasked, unthanked. Zane sank to the nearest bench, the weight of his guilt crashing into him like the car that had shattered her world. She had loved him when he didn't deserve it. She had believed in him when he gave her every reason not to. And now she lay in that hospital bed because someone had wanted her gone, and he hadn't protected her. He looked through the glass window at her fragile frame, hooked to wires, still, silent. And he made a silent vow. If she wakes up, I'll never leave her side again. Not as a man who owes her, but as a man who finally understands her worth. Morning light filtered through the blinds like a hesitant promise. Zane sat by her bedside, unshaven, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. Her hand was cold but still beneath his. He hadn't moved in hours. Then, a flicker, a soft twitch in her fingers, a breath that felt deeper. Her lashes fluttered like the wings of a fragile bird. Zane straightened, heart in his throat. Her eyes opened slowly, groggy, unfocused at first, until they found his. And then, a whisper, cracked, barely audible, but it shattered him. "You stayed." Zane broke. He pressed his forehead to her hand, holding back a flood of tears. "Always," he whispered. "Always." That evening, under soft hospital lighting, he sat beside her, finally ready to speak not as the man the world praised, but as the man who had made every mistake that nearly lost her. "I lied to you," Zane began, voice thick with regret. "At first, this was all for show, a way to clean up my image. I was selfish, blind, but somewhere along the way, you became the only real thing in my life." He reached for her hand gently. "I didn't come to apologize with words. I came because I couldn't bear the thought of you not knowing the truth. I love you, and I'm sorry it took almost losing you to finally say it." Ayla looked at him, silent, eyes unreadable. Then she spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "I didn't forgive you because of what you said, but because of what you did." She turned her head slowly, gazing at the vase of sunflowers by the window, the ones he brought every day she was unconscious. "You stayed. You fought. You changed. That matters more than anything else ever could." A week later, the press gathered outside the courthouse, expecting a statement about the scandal, the rumors, the company. But Zane had only one thing to address. He stood at the podium, a calm storm in a charcoal suit, eyes steady, voice firm. "I once made the mistake of believing someone's past defined them," he began. "But today I stand corrected by the woman who saved me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "She's not a rebel. She's not a wild card. She's the reason I stand here today. She gave everything without asking for anything in return." He paused, and the cameras caught the shift in his gaze. Behind him, Ayla stepped into view, elegant, composed, radiant. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was a roar in the silence. 6.1. Garden of New Beginnings. Stopwatch hash 1 hour and 40 minutes to 1 hour and 45 minutes. The Whitmore garden was transformed. Twinkling fairy lights danced across the branches. Soft petals lined the cobblestone path, and the stars watched quietly overhead. Zane led her gently into the heart of the garden, where roses bloomed like promises waiting to be spoken. He turned to her, nerves visible for the first time. "I proposed to you once, not out of love, but out of obligation. This time," he said, lowering to one knee, "I'm asking not because I should, but because I want to, because I need to." He opened the box. Inside, a ring that gleamed, not because of its diamond, but because of the moment. "Ayla Danvers, will you marry me again, for real this time?" Ayla looked down at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. The man who had once been her captor in a cruel game was now her greatest sanctuary. A soft, tearful smile spread across her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Zane, this time, I choose you too." He rose, slipping the ring on her finger. They embraced beneath the stars, music swelling in the background, a soft kiss sealing a new beginning, one written not in contracts, but in choice. The hall was filled with light and hope. The Danvers Whitmore Foundation had just launched its first initiative, a sanctuary for women escaping forced marriages, political exploitation, and domestic power plays. At the center stood Ayla, now poised with purpose, not as a symbol, but as a voice. She delivered her speech with quiet fire, her words rippling through the hearts of every woman in the audience. Zane watched from afar, hands in pockets, smiling like a man who had finally found home. Not in a house, not in wealth, but in her. As the screen faded into dusk, a gentle voice echoed, a final narration. The girl who ran away from love ran right into it. Ayla and Zane walked hand in hand down the cobblestone garden path, laughter echoing under the stars, their silhouettes fading into golden light. Text fades in. Did this story touch your soul? Share your thoughts in the comments. Fade out.